Hey everybody, it's Dr. Jonny Bowden with a webinar entitled, as you can see, Why the USDA Food Pyramid Sucks, and more importantly, why you should probably generally ignore any government advice on what to eat. And I'll explain that in just a minute. So let's look at the original food guide pyramid. And by the way, we've changed this a few times. It's now my plate. It's all kind of a version of the same thing. So if we talk about the original food guide pyramid, which guided our choices for umpteen years, we're really talking about all versions of the food pyramid because they will all share the same problems that I'm going to discuss in this webinar. And it kind of starts with the United States Department of Agriculture. And I'm not going to make this boring and historical, but it's just a couple of facts you ought to know about where the food pyramid comes from. So the USDA was first formed in the 1860s, and it had two mandates. And this is very, very important to remember. One was to protect agriculture in the United States and to protect the agricultural industry in the United States. And the second mandate was to provide education about nutrition and health to the general public. Now, when you look at these pictures of these factory farms, those two mandates don't sound like they're really contradictory, and they could certainly live at the same time. I mean, after all, protecting this wonderful agriculture where these animals were raised on pasture and they weren't fed all kinds of drugs and hormones and steroids, and they were producing good, healthy food, and agriculture wasn't mono-farming. It was, the rotation of crops, and the soil had nitrogen. It would be great to protect American agricultural products and also give good information about the health benefits of those. But what's happened, and as you will see in this webinar, what's happened is that it's now like telling the tobacco industry, hey guys, you got two mandates. One is to educate the public about health and smoking, and two is to sell a lot of cigarettes. See, those two mandates don't really go together. And what we'll see is that the USDA food pyramid, in loyalty to its mandate to promote agriculture, has no longer been able to also promote good health because they no longer go together. And here's why. These wonderful farms that were protected and that were enhanced and encouraged and given subsidies to for all good reasons, this heart of America farms, that's not what they look like right now. And around the 70s, this guy, Earl Butz, was the Department of Agriculture, head of the Department of Agriculture under Nixon. And he didn't like these guys. He thought this wasn't really in America's interests for production and for preventing malnutrition and all kinds of other things. And he liked factory farms. He liked big agricultural businesses. This is what those farms look like today. And that's the tip of the iceberg. So the farms of today, the agricultural products of today, are very, very different than they were when the USDA was first formed. So let's talk first about grains, which are at the heart of the food pyramid. If we go back right here real fast, look at the original food pyramid. What's at the bottom? Bread, cereal, rice, and pasta. 6 to 11 servings. It's the base of the food pyramid. This is what we've been telling people to eat since like 1985, okay? Grains, ever since they were invented, have been kind of a double-edged sword. And this wonderful paper, which we were assigned in graduate school, this was written in 1999, and it was written by, you may not recognize the name, Loren Cordain, but he is the father of the paleo movement that you guys know. He is the first academic scholar to have written a book called The Paleo Principle, or The Paleo Diet, that really brought this concept out there. And all the paleo gurus of today, Mark Siss and Rob Wolf, they all learned from Loren Cordain. And Loren Cordain wrote this paper saying that, look, cereal grains are a double-edged sword, and here's why. We would not have civilization without cereal grains. Think about it. Without agriculture, you don't have cities. Without cities, you don't have civilization. You just have lots of indigenous tribes running around hunting and gathering and setting up shop wherever because they're not dependent on the soil. They're dependent on what they can find, what they can hunt, what they can gather, what they can fish, and then they move on. But Grains and agriculture allowed humanity to set up cities and towns. But they had and so in many ways we would not have a civilization if it weren't for grains. The bad side is we got a lot less healthy when we started eating grains. Grains are not necessarily the best food for humanity. And I don't want to go into all that now. I just want to talk about the fact that grains are at the base of the USDA food pyramid in all the versions, including my plate. And you've been so brainwashed with crap about grains and whole grains, and you need them for fiber. Not true. It's actually a pretty low fiber food when you compare it to things like beans and avocados. So we've been told a lot of wonderful things about grains, but I wanted to put that in the context of this is the #1 production of U.S. agriculture. So are we going to get really clear, unbiased information about things like grains from the USDA? I think by the end of this very short webinar, you will agree with me that we're not. So what are some of the problems of grains? Well, I'm not going to review all of them here because this is going to be short and sweet. But I'm going to tell you 2 books that nobody who is interested in their health should be without. These are 2 of the most important books of the 21st century. One of them is called Wheat Belly, and it's written by a cardiologist named William Davis. The other is called Grain Brain, and it's written by a neurologist named David Perlmutter. Both of these men are unbelievable scientists and writers and thinkers, and they are both mentors of mine. I know them both. I've interviewed both of them. Both of them have written blurbs on my books. I cannot recommend their work highly enough. And the basic bottom line of this stuff is that grains are very inflammatory for many people. Gluten is a gut irritant for many people. Again, not saying everyone. But remember that grains are relatively new in the human history. You know, the human genus from which Homo sapiens come has been on the planet for about 2.4 million years. And Homo sapiens came around about 100,000, 110,000 years ago out of Africa. And grains started around, at least agricultural grains that we know and cultivated, started only 10,000 years ago. Not a very long time in the time clock of history. And many of us have not adapted to a diet that is so heavily based with grains. And the grains that we eat today, and both these books point out, have nothing to do with the grains, the ancient grains, the grains they ate. Even if those grains did have some benefits, very little of that is left in today's grains. So I'm not a big fan of the need for grains. Now, what about grains meaning things like wheat? What about things like soy and corn? Well, this is another subject for another long webinar, and it has to do with GMO foods. Now, I wrote an ebook. It is free. Any of you can have it. You just sign up on my website. I'll set it up so that you get this book if you sign up on my website, jonnybowden.com. But it's really free to anybody who writes in and asks for it. And it's the result of a couple of months of research that I put into really getting into the heart of the GMO issue. But the point is that about 92% of all of our soy and all of our corn is GMO. I don't think that's a good thing. I think if you read my report on it, you might agree with me. But the point is that we're talking about wheat, which is a potentially harmful thing for many, many people. And we're talking about soy and corn, which is highly genetically modified. And I don't think that's a great thing. And yet those are the big crops in the USDA. So if you're the USDA and you got to protect agriculture, what are you going to be protecting? What are you going to be recommending? Sugar is one. No, here are the top 5. Sugar, wheat, soybeans, corn, and the 5th is cotton that we don't eat. Okay, so of the 5 biggest crops, and I think the 6th is rice. So you have these starchy, sugary, in most cases, genetically modified carbohydrates that are forming the basis of the food pyramid. And everything we know since then has told us this is a very, very big mistake. Now, if you want to understand something, you got to go to their first principles. You can't just go with there's always a core value in any system of thought, any system of recommendations. There's always something underneath it that tells you kind of what is the value, what is the belief system of what we're looking at. And in the case of the food pyramid, there are two basic principles, two underlying principles that the food pyramid is based on. Number one is we eat too much fat. Fat is a bad thing. We should cut back on our fat. Fat makes us obese and it clogs our arteries and it gives us heart disease. And all these things, which we now know are not true. So I've written a lot about this in my book, The Great Cholesterol Myth. There's a ton of stuff like this on the internet, and but you want to get the good stuff, the stuff that actually comes from journals. Like this one is a quote from the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. That's peer-reviewed research. If you want more of it, you go on PubMed.gov. That's the library for the National Institute of Medicine. You just put in saturated fat, heart disease. You'll find some old studies that still link it via cholesterol, but everything after 2010 is very clear that fat was wrongly blamed for heart disease. It doesn't cause heart disease, okay? This is an interesting quote where it says, as of 2014, Dr. Oz says, saturated fats aren't the problem. Processed carbohydrates are the problem, of which we agree 100%. And here you have one of the early researchers who discovered this in the 30s, Dr. Weston Price, saying, oh, well, it only took mainstream medicine, about 80 years to validate my research. So, fat, the basic principle of the food pyramid to avoid fat is flawed. It's wrong. And it's actually very bad for our health. Again, here's more references. That's my book, The Great Cholesterol Myth. So you don't have to get mine. You can get Fat and Cholesterol Doesn't Cause Heart Disease. There's heart attacks. There's many books like this. They all talk about the same research. And I am here to tell you that research is valid. So principle number two is that grains are good, right? We all grew up with this. I mean, certainly I did. Cheerios, look at it, lowers your cholesterol 4%. Like this matters at all, which it doesn't, by the way. Now you have chocolate Cheerios, Wheaties. When I was growing up, that was the breakfast of champions, right? And they had all these pictures of the athletes eating Wheaties. This is the worst breakfast possible. This is nothing but processed carbs that turn into sugar in your body in about the time it takes for you to swallow. And what is the research showing us now? New global study links carbohydrates, not fat, to heart disease. So principle number two, that all grains all the time, 6 to 11 servings of grains, make grains the basis, carbs the basis of your diet, is kind of nonsensical advice. It's really, really past its expiration date. So what are some of the problems with high carbohydrate diets? Number one, they're too low in fat. And we now know, or I hope we know, that fat not only is necessary for health, not only is it the most satiating macronutrient, not only does it help your immune system and help you form hormones so that your hormonal health is better, and keep you from overeating because it keeps you full longer, and also has a zero effect on your fat storage hormone insulin. So when you make a diet too low in fat, you lose all those benefits. And they are benefits. You also lose fat-soluble vitamins, like vitamin E and D and K and A. Number two, a high carbohydrate diet is just too damn high in sugar and starch. Nobody's eating a high carbohydrate diet that's made up of Brussels sprouts. We're eating pasta and rice and potatoes and crackers and cookies and bread. And all of that stuff converts to sugar in a heartbeat, and all of that is a nice little prelude to prediabetes, which is a prelude to diabetes, which is a prelude to heart disease. So you don't want that sugar. And you don't want that starch, and that's pretty much all you get in a high carbohydrate diet. And most of the carbohydrates in our basic American diet aren't the vegetables. They aren't Brussels sprouts and cauliflower, folks. We all know it. Most of the carbohydrates that we eat are highly processed, and processed foods have their own set of problems, even apart from the fact that they're high in sugar and starch. They have a lot of other problems that are linked to a lot of different health conditions. Way too much to go into. So here's a wonderful and very famous cartoon that kind of shows the evolution of man with food. And there's a lot of truth to this. So, if not the food pyramid, then what do we eat? Well, I had a wonderful mentor in nutrition, the great the great late Robert Crayon, who taught many of the people that, if you guys follow health gurus and you're on a lot of mailing lists, probably half those people were taught by Robert Crayon. And Robert used to say, this is what, if you're ever in confusion about nutrition information advice and you're ever confused about what to eat, here's a thought exercise that will get you the answer. Imagine yourself naked with a stick on the African Serengeti. That's what the Serengeti looks like, by the way, folks. So you're naked with a stick. What can you catch? What can you hunt? What can you pick up? What can you knock out of a tree? What can you eat? Because whatever it is, there's a 99% chance that it's damn good for you. So I took that question of Robert Crayon's and I put it into what I call the Jonny Bowden 4 food groups. And it's a really simple principle you can take with you that can replace the food pyramid for you right now. And it's much simpler. Here it is. Eat foods that you could hunt, fish, gather, or pluck. There it is. There's the 4 food groups: hunt, fish, gather, and pluck. Look for foods from those groups, or foods that could have come from that group. I sometimes use the word paleotech to indicate, like, these are, in spirit, they're paleo foods, but you buy them in the grocery store. So I can buy fish in the grocery store, and I can buy grass-fed meat in the grocery store. I don't have to go out and hunt it with a bow and arrow, but the spirit of it is these are foods that are huntable, fishable, gatherable, or pluckable. Examples, right? Grass-fed meat, raw milk. Drink this stuff all the time from grass-fed cows. Wild-caught salmon. Look at the difference between wild-caught salmon and farm. That's when we get into the difference between processed foods and natural, real foods. Vegetables, every kind of berry you can mention. Nuts, 100% grass-fed yogurt. All of these are great, great, great foods. I put the keto diet food pyramid in just to show you kind of the way modern thinking is about the role of carbohydrates and fats. You do not have to be on the keto diet pyramid. You do not have to follow any pyramid. But I'm just showing you how they've actually put the conventional wisdom on its ass, turned it upside down, and you see healthy fats and oils and fatty fish and meat are at the bottom of the keto diet food pyramid. Here's the one I like. It's just a basic lower carb, higher fat kind of a pyramid. I don't like pyramids in general, but if you wanted one, I'd look at this as a much better guide to eating. Kind of get the base be your goods, fats, and oils, and that does include butter. And if you're surprised by that, go watch my YouTube video on butter. But butter and avocados and healthy oils and good grass-fed meat and fish and protein and full-fat dairy from good healthy cheeses and raw cheeses and pasture-raised eggs. And then, of course, salad, vegetable, berries, and nuts. And you cannot go wrong with this. And there is not a Cheerios on the slide, as you can see. So, there are 3 rules of food. And if you remember these 3, you will never need a food pyramid. Number 1, if you left this food out overnight, would it spoil? And as you can see, our sample food there, Twinkie, fails all of the 3 questions. If you left it out overnight, no, it wouldn't spoil. It wouldn't spoil in 4 years. It'd still be there. Number 2, would your great-great-grandmother recognize it as food? A very interesting story is when they did the research for a book called The Blue Zones, they went and interviewed some of these 100-year-old people who were so healthy in the late 90s, and they were all active and, living in these remote areas, and they would show them some of the supermarket food that we eat, and they actually said, "What is that?" They didn't recognize it as food. You know why? Because it's not! A Lunchable is not a food. So, would your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother recognize this stuff as food is the second question. And the third is it something you could have hunted, fished for, gathered, or plucked? That's what I was talking about when I said paleotech. Basically, I don't expect you to get a bow and arrow and be all Ted Nugent and go, hunt caribou. But could you have hunted this food? If it was made in a factory with 18 different chemicals and it's put in a box, it was never huntable or fishable or gatherable or pluckable. This is a very famous mantra by a very famous writer named Michael Pollan, and it's quoted all the time. And you really can't do much. You can't do much better than eat food, meaning real food, just the kind of food we're talking about. Not too much. Cut back a little bit. Mostly plants. That does not mean vegetarian or vegan. It just means eat a lot of stuff that grows, or that you could pluck, or that you could gather, and mix that in with your grass-fed meat and your wild salmon. And here's the most important food rule in the world, and this I'm telling you as someone who has been a vegetarian, been a ketotarian, been on every kind of diet and every kind of exercise plan in the world you can imagine, looked at every macronutrient proportion. Should it be 30%, 30%, 40%? You know, those old 40, 30, 30 zone diets where 40% is carbs, 30 is fat, 30 is protein. Should it be 80, 20, 20? There's a million different combos. I've looked at all of them. This rule takes precedence over every single one of them. Here it is. Eat real food. And if you have to ask if it's real food or not, it's probably not. So don't give it the benefit of the doubt. I hope you liked this. Please hit the like button if you did. And thank you so much for coming. Subscribe to the channel. Send me in your questions, and we'll do another webinar really soon.